Hey board gamers, this is Will with a Cardboard Mint. I wanted to give a quick spotlight over the classic Dune board game. This is still to this day one of the most interesting dudes in the map style area control board games that I have ever encountered. It is a little tough to get to the table though, I will admit. It can play from 2 to 6 players, but optimally you'll have a full complement of 6 players, and it could take up to 5 or 6 hours to play, which is quite a long time. But I will tell you now, it is well worth time and effort to learn and to play the game, especially if you have interest in the Dune universe. Maybe you just came off of seeing the new movie, which is excellent, by the way, and are looking forward to the second half. So this board game has had quite an interesting history as well. I have here the new version put out by Gale 9 in 2019, but the original was printed by Avalon Hill in 1979. And after a period of time, it just kind of went out of print. The Herbert estate just decided not to license any future games, and it almost left into obscurity, except there was been a dedicated group of fans who really kept it alive over the years. There had been numerous tournaments over the years in history, just playing this game, revising it. The designers, Bill Eberle, Jack Kittredge, and Peter Olotka, sorry if I pronounced it wrong, have really kept the game alive and in the forefront of the gaming community. While original copies probably sold at exorbitant prices on eBay, there has been a large homebrew community that have created a print and pray versions over the years. Primarily the graphic designer and artist Ilea, which I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, has created much of the artwork you see now. And it's interesting that Gale 9 decided, instead of creating their own artwork, they would license Ilea's artwork and use it for the newest publication of the Dune game. Of course, with the designer's blessings, the original designers came on board to tweak things a little bit and incorporate some of the newer rules from the tournaments into the gameplay, and have really brought this out so that anyone could pick it up and love the original game. It to this day still holds up with some really interesting mechanics, as well as the faction asymmetry is so different compared to any other game I can think of. With really popular examples today being games like Root, where each faction plays very differently. This game, each faction will still play the same. They follow the same sets of rules, which makes the game much easier to teach than Root, by the way. But the things that they can do and how they act is also very different, and really lends itself to some of like the most interesting asymmetry in gameplay. So, for example, like here we have, this is the Spacing Guild. So in the Dune novels, the guild are in charge of providing long distance travel from planet to planet, from solar system to solar system. And they do this by using spice as a way to kind of foresee the future, so that when they fold space, they can find the safest path so that their ship doesn't fold itself right into a star or another planet. And how they created this in the game is that when you want to hire new troops to bring them onto the surface to fight, you are paying, instead of the bank, you're paying the Dune player, the Spacing Guild player, to recruit units, which is really bizarre. And similarly, the Emperor is the bank. Traditionally in games like Monopoly or Catan or whatever have you, there will be a supply of resources that is available for players to pull from. And while like there is still a supply here to pull from and place on the board when there are spice blows to create little resource balloons that you can go harvest. But when you're buying things like weapons and items like that, you are handing the money not back to the supply, but directly to the Emperor player. And he puts that straight into his personal coffers and can make use of that. Because of this, there is really a disparity in wealth throughout the game, which is interestingly balanced by the other abilities. Now, I won't profess for this to be the most balanced of games, but I think they make do with putting out some of the balance in favor of some of the more interesting faction abilities, as well as having your own chance to kind of sway things. And what I mean by this is you can form alliances during the game. It's not necessary. A player can win on their own by controlling 3 of the 5 different cities on the map. But also, you can choose to form an alliance with another player. The victory condition will be harder now. You will have to form 4 cities out of 5 in order to win. But you now have 2 people working together. And the interactions between the different factions' abilities can really help. For example, I played a game where I played as the Fremen, which, being the natives to the planet, have better insight into how the storm moves around the board and can wipe out troops, as well as they can survive better through the storms. Now, I partnered with the Atreides, which is pretty thematic, but that aside, the Atreides player, whenever it's time to do the auction phase of the round, where you're pulling cards from the treasury deck and you are auctioning off items, the Atreides player sees every card that comes up for auction, even though the auction is done blind. No one knows what they're bidding on. So the Atreides player would be, whispering to me, like, this is the one you want. Like, you need to pick up this card to win this fight. Or like, hey, watch out, this player has, the shield card. So why don't you buy this next one, is the laser, so that we can infamously combine the laser and the shield together to detonate and destroy all their entire forces, which we managed to pull off, and it was quite wonderful. So then there are factions like the Bene Gesserit, which may not appear to be especially powerful at the time, but what they get to do is they have an entire deck of cards that they get to look through at the beginning of the game, and they will select which faction they think is going to win and what round they think that they're going to win on. And if they guess correctly, then the Bene Gesserit actually win instead, which almost happened in our last play. The Bene Gesserit player was only 1 round off in guessing the winner, and it was so close because they have lots of opportunities to manipulate the win, because the Bene Gesserit players have kind of advisors that travel along with every other faction's military. They can, of course, split off to create their own force, but interestingly, they are, just like in the books and the movies, they are working behind the scenes, they are advising military, and they are kind of permeated throughout the world. And then I also have a new expansion, which adds the Tleilaxu and the Ixians. The Ixians are famous for their technology, bordering on the band technology. They don't quite cross over into the being able to create machines that think. Now, a little bit of backstory in the Dune universe. There was a time where machines rose up against man, and man fought them back. And now, because of that, no one may build machines that are made in with the minds of humans, so they may not think. Now, the Ixians kind of skirt that, but have access to a lot of interesting technology, as well as the Tleilaxu adds another faction who controls one of the interesting parts of the game, which is the Tleilaxu tanks. So what happens here is that when one of your leaders dies in combat, they go into the Tleilaxu tank where they can be cloned and essentially brought back to life. And the Tleilaxu player with the new faction will allow that person to collect money from those troops and those leaders being recast and rebuilt and sent out to fight again. Which again is very interesting, very thematic. And this is why I have Duncan Idle here. But any other player can have different factions there. Combat is also very interesting. We've seen this being adapted by other games later on. Famously, games like Scythe, where you will pledge a certain amount of combat power, as well as maybe hide a card behind the screen, as well as being able to tuck in a leader. And you, of course, can only dial up to the number of the combat strength you currently have, meaning troops on the board. But the leader will also fight, and the cards may add some additional weapons to maybe take out the enemy leader or defend against cards that are going to take out your leader. And then combat is done by both players revealing, potentially killing leaders. But also very interestingly is there are traitor cards. So this is what the Harkonnen are good at. They will have more of these than any other player, but everyone is dealt a certain number of traitor cards. And maybe you up against combat against a player who put in a faction leader, and you happen to own their traitor card. You can reveal that traitor card to instead make them instantly lose that entire combat. So there's a lot of swinginess, I guess you could say, in the combat. But the moments, the memorable moments, the feels where you think you've almost won and then the traitor card gets pulled on you, or vice versa. The big moments that you end up talking about with your friends are just permeate this game everywhere. It is such a good game for that. It is almost more of an event game than a game that you would just pull out on a quick game night and play around, round two, and then put it away. It is not for the faint of heart, though. Like, there are 6 different decks. Each faction has very different abilities, and but the game still plays all on its own. Now, interestingly, Gale Force 9 has also decided that they will soon be releasing, from the day of this video release, a new version of this game called Dune, a game of conquest and diplomacy. And it is a reimagining of this original Dune game, which we've kind of seen that a little bit before. After the Dune game license was lost from the Avalon Hill version, there has been a couple of remakes, you could say, that have been renamed games like Rex, based in the Twilight Imperium board game universe. Now, this new game that's coming out will bring it down to 4 players instead of the 6 with 8 factions in the expansion. But they will have simplified the decks and some of the combat, still keep a lot of the main feel of the game with the spice blows and the storm and the combat wheels, but they'll bring it down so that the gameplay is not nearly as long. There's maybe not quite as much swinginess, but you can get a real good quick game in from 2 to 4 players. The 2-player being also very interesting, there are combined factions. So you may happen to get the Fremen and the Atreides as a single combined faction for you to play. So we'll see how that goes. I'll try to grab a copy and give you guys my thoughts of that. If you would like to see the gameplay on video or like to hear my thoughts, please let me know in the description. Or just what do you think of the game in general. I'm excited to play it, although I will say that the artwork of the new game is not my preferred style of artwork. They're using stills from the movie, which I think is never the right way to go. I think original art is, while more expensive, is always preferred. Even if it's just simple line art, I think is still preferable than stills from the movie. You know, it just feels cheap, like they had zero budget and just copied screens straight off of the film, which is unfortunate. Now, good news, there is also supposed to be released this year. At this time, I'm not hearing much from it, so probably it's going to be delayed. But there'll be a second expansion to this 2019 version of the Dune game that will introduce COM, which is the Combined Unnet Advancer Mercantile Combined Unnet Ober Advancer Mercantile Guild. It's a bit of a mouthful, and they are sort of the behind the scenes houses of the Dune universe, who are meeting and running kind of the greater flow and behind the scenes like of the Dune galaxy. You know, while the Emperor is in charge, COM handles a lot of the trading of goods from planet to planet and things like that. So it'd be interesting to see what they bring to the table, as well as House Richesse, which is kind of formally a bit of a rival to the Atreides, not so much as the Harkonnen is, but they do play a role in some of the prequel novels and in the history of the Dune lore. So it'll be interesting to see what they bring to the table in that expansion. So anyways, I do recommend the game. It is pretty affordable and not especially difficult to learn, but there's a fair amount of small rules. It is an older game, but it still holds to this day. And I have yet to see a game that has factions taking over the different aspects of the game and kind of being in charge, right? Instead of like the player who owns the game running the bank and handing out cash, it's the Emperor owns that. If you know of any games that do that, please comment in the description. I'd love to hear about it. Asymmetry in games is always very interesting to me, especially if you can teach it relatively quickly without having to teach entirely separate games to each player. Maybe I'll do a video on something like that in the future. Games like Root are notorious for, but I do love the game. Of course, I'm already a big fan of the Dune universe, so I apologize if your feelings are not quite the same. But there's a reason why it is being brought back, and they've made expansions for it. It is just that good. So give it a try. Maybe see if you can get into a game day with some friends, or get together to get a copy. Yeah, it is certainly not a must-have, but you will probably not regret your time spent with this. Anyways, I'm Will, and hope you enjoy playing more games.